The gift Daniel kept. Daniel had raised Marcus to believe that family always finds room at the table. So when his son opened the front door on Christmas morning and said there wasn't room anymore, Daniel understood, for the first time in 68 years, exactly how alone a man could be. "I need you to hear me out, Dad." Marcus stood in the doorway in his robe, coffee steaming in his hand, refusing to meet his father's eyes. Behind him, the Christmas tree glittered in the living room, and Daniel could hear his grandchildren, Ava and Ben, tearing wrapping paper apart with the particular joy only 7 and 9-year-olds could summon. "It's not working, you being here. Rebecca and I talked about it last night, and it's just not working." Daniel stood on the porch in his coat, holding a grocery bag with cinnamon rolls he'd gotten up at 5 to bake, the way he used to for Marcus's mother every Christmas until the cancer took her 4 years ago. The cold came through his slippers. He hadn't even had time to put on real shoes. "Marcus," he said carefully, "can we talk about this inside? It's 15 degrees. Rebecca doesn't want you inside right now." Marcus's jaw tightened, the same way it used to when he was 12 and caught in a lie. "She's upset. You said some things to her yesterday about the money, about how we're spending it, and she feels like you don't respect how we run our house. I asked one question about private school tuition when you told me 2 months ago you were struggling to make the mortgage payment." Daniel kept his voice even, though something in his chest was folding in on itself. "That's not disrespect, that's concern. It's not your business anymore." Marcus finally looked at him, and Daniel saw something he hadn't expected, not anger, but a kind of desperate, cornered shame. "You moved in 8 months ago because you said you just needed a little time after selling the house. It's been 8 months, Dad. Rebecca feels like this is permanent now, like you're never leaving, and honestly, I'm starting to feel that way too. I've been paying you rent since March." Daniel's voice cracked slightly on the word rent, because it wasn't really about the money. It had never been about the money. I know you have, but it's not just about the money." Marcus glanced over his shoulder, lowered his voice. "Rebecca wants her house back. She wants Christmas to be our Christmas, not managing you and your opinions and your grief on top of everything else. I'm sorry, I really am, but I think you should go stay at a hotel for a while. Figure out your next place. I'll help you look." Daniel looked past his son's shoulder at the tree, at the stockings with his grandchildren's names stitched in gold thread, and noticed that there was no third stocking this year, the one Marcus's wife had made for him last Christmas as a joke gift that had turned, over the months, into something that felt real. It was gone from the mantel. They had taken it down before he'd even come outside. That was the detail that told him everything. "Okay," Daniel said quietly. "Okay, Marcus." "Dad, I'll get my things." He turned before his son could see his face crumple, walked back through the house past the tree and the torn wrapping paper and his grandchildren, who looked up at him with confusion. Ava started to say, "Grandpa, look what I..." before Rebecca, standing rigid near the kitchen island with her arms crossed and her eyes red-rimmed with the particular fury of someone who has decided to feel wronged, cut her off with a sharp look. Daniel didn't say goodbye to Rebecca. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't make things worse for his grandchildren to witness. He packed 2 suitcases in 11 minutes. He'd learned, over 8 months of living as a guest in his son's house, how to keep his life compact, how to take up as little space as possible, how to be grateful and small and easy. He left the cinnamon rolls on the counter. He kissed Ava and Ben on the tops of their heads, told them he loved them and that Grandpa had some errands to run, and he did not cry until he was in his car, pulling out of the driveway of the house. He had co-signed the loan for 6 years ago so that Marcus and Rebecca could afford it in the first place. He drove to the Comfort Inn off Route 9 and checked into a room with a heating unit that rattled like a dying engine, and he sat on the edge of the bed still wearing his coat, and for a long time he did not do anything at all. Daniel was 71 years old. He had spent 43 of those years as a machinist and then a mechanical engineer at a mid-sized manufacturing firm outside Hartford, the kind of steady, unglamorous career that had let him and his wife Carol raise one son, pay off a modest house, and put a little away for retirement. Not a fortune, but enough they'd always believed to be comfortable. What almost nobody knew, not Marcus, not Rebecca, not even most of Daniel's old co-workers, was that Daniel had spent the last 11 years of his career, and then the first 6 years of his retirement, tinkering in his garage workshop on something that had started as a way to keep his hands busy after Carol's diagnosis. A modification to a valve mechanism used in small hydraulic systems, the kind of unglamorous, invisible engineering that nobody ever thinks about, but that shows up in everything from wheelchair lifts to agricultural equipment to prosthetic limbs. He'd filed the patent quietly in 2019, 2 years after Carol died, mostly because finishing it felt like the last thing they'd started together, back when she used to bring him coffee in the garage at midnight and ask him to explain what he was building, even though she didn't understand a word of it. He never told Marcus about the patent because for years it was worth nothing, an idea sitting in a drawer, generating no income, meaning nothing to anyone but Daniel. He hadn't lied exactly. He just never had a reason to bring it up, and after a while, silence about it became its own kind of habit, the way certain private things do. That changed 9 weeks before Christmas, when a mid-sized industrial supplier called Harvorsen Dynamics reached out about licensing the mechanism for a new line of mobility equipment. The negotiations had moved slowly, the way these things do, lawyers and engineers going back and forth, and Daniel had told no one, not because he intended to keep it secret forever, but because he'd wanted to be sure it was real before he said anything. He'd wanted more than anything to walk into his son's house on Christmas morning and tell them all at once. The deal had closed on December 23rd, $2.3 million, structured as a lump sum plus ongoing royalties. He had planned that Christmas morning to tell Marcus he was paying off the mortgage, to set up college funds for Ava and Ben that would carry them clean through graduate school if they wanted it, to finally, quietly, be the kind of help to his son that didn't come with strings or guilt, or the exhausting arithmetic of being a burden, the kind of help that comes purely from love, arriving like a gift instead of a rescue. He'd been planning to tell them after the cinnamon rolls. Instead, he'd stood on the porch in his slippers, while his son took down his Christmas stocking and asked him to leave. He didn't tell Marcus about the money in the driveway. He didn't call that night or the next morning, though his phone held 4 unopened texts from Marcus by December 26th. "Dad, are you okay? Dad, please just tell me you're somewhere warm. I feel terrible about how that went. Can we talk? Rebecca and I are willing to have you for dinner Sunday to talk things through." Daniel read every one of them sitting in the stiff armchair of his motel room, and for the first time in his life, he understood something about his own father that he'd never understood before, the particular, quiet dignity of a man who has decided that being wanted matters more than being needed, and that he would rather be alone than be tolerated. On the morning of December 27th, 2 days after Christmas, Daniel drove to the offices of Harvorsen Dynamics with the signed licensing agreement in a manila envelope on the passenger seat, and he asked to speak with the attorney who had handled the closing. "I want to restructure the payout," he told her. Her name was Priya Shah, a sharp, patient woman in her 40s who had walked him through every clause of the deal over the past 2 months. "The lump sum, I don't want it going into my personal account." She studied him. "Everything all right, Mr. Voss?" "Everything's fine," Daniel said, and found to his own surprise that it was true, or truer than it had been in days. "I want to set up a fund, the Carol Voss Pediatric Mobility Fund, through Hartford Children's Hospital. All $2.3 million, structured so the hospital's mobility and rehabilitation program gets equipment funding and staffing support for the next decade, plus the ongoing royalty stream on top of that, indefinitely." Priya blinked. "That's Mr. Voss, that's the entire settlement. Your entire settlement and future royalties. Are you certain? We can absolutely draft this, but I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't ask whether you want to sit with this decision a little longer. This is significant. People typically take some for themselves, set some aside for family." Daniel thought of Carol, who had spent the last 11 months of her life in a wheelchair that never quite fit her right, that squeaked on every turn, that the insurance company had fought them on for 6 weeks before approving. He thought of the way she used to grip the armrest during transfers, wincing, trying not to let him see how much it hurt so he wouldn't worry. He thought of his grandchildren's stocking, gone from the mantel before he'd even had the chance to say goodbye. "I've thought about it for 2 days straight," Daniel said. "It's what she would have wanted, and it's what I want. Draft it." The papers were finalized by 4 o'clock that afternoon. The hospital's development office, thrilled and a little stunned by the size and structure of the gift, asked whether Daniel would be willing to have his name attached publicly for the sake of encouraging other donors. Daniel almost said no, old habit, the instinct to stay small, but then he thought of something else, that hiding had gotten him exactly here, alone in a motel room on the day after Christmas, and that maybe it was time to stop being invisible about the things that mattered. "You can use my name," he said. Carol would have liked seeing it in print, honestly. She always said I never took credit for anything. The story ran 2 days later, December 29th, first in the Hartford Courant's local section, and then picked up by a regional news affiliate. Local widower donates entire patent windfall, over $2 million, to Children's Hospital in late wife's name. There was a photo of Daniel that the reporter had taken in the hospital's rehabilitation wing, standing beside a boy of about 10 in a new motorized wheelchair, the kind with the modified valve mechanism that made the turning radius smoother, safer, more responsive than anything on the market before. Daniel was smiling in the photo in a way he hadn't smiled in years. Rebecca saw it first, shared into a Hartford parents' Facebook group by a woman she vaguely knew from Ava's school. Caption: "This made me cry. What an incredible man." She read the article twice before she understood that the Daniel Voss in the photo, the retired mechanical engineer who had quietly invented a hydraulics mechanism worth millions and just as quietly given every dollar of it away, was her father-in-law. The same Daniel Voss she had watched stand on her porch in his slippers 4 days earlier, while her husband told him there wasn't room for him anymore. She didn't say anything to Marcus for almost an hour. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, staring at the photograph, feeling something complicated and sick move through her chest, not just shock, but the specific shame of realizing that every private complaint she'd voiced about Daniel over the past 8 months, every comment about him being a burden, taking up space, costing them money, had been about a man who had this whole time been sitting on enough money to change their lives forever, and had never once mentioned it. Had never once used it as leverage, had never once made them feel small for what they didn't know. When Marcus came home from work, she turned the laptop toward him without a word. He read it standing in the kitchen in his coat, and Rebecca watched his face go through something she'd never seen on him before: disbelief, then something like awe, and then, slowly, unmistakably, grief. "He was going to tell us," Marcus said quietly, understanding arriving all at once the way it sometimes does. "Christmas morning. That's Dad always does the cinnamon rolls first, then talks. He was going to tell us at breakfast. He set the laptop down carefully like it might break, and I kicked him out before he got the chance." "Marcus, we didn't know." "That's not the point, Rebecca." His voice wasn't angry, just hollowed out. "The point is I didn't need to know. He wasn't a burden. He drove me to school every single day for 12 years because we only had one car. He worked doubles the year I broke my arm so Mom could stay home with me. He sold the house he and Mom bought together, the house I grew up in, because he said it was too big for one person, and he didn't want to be a weight on us financially while he figured things out. He has never once, not once in my whole life, made me feel like I owed him anything. And I stood on that porch and told him there wasn't room for him at Christmas." Rebecca didn't have an answer. There wasn't one that would fix what had already happened. Marcus found his father not at the motel Daniel had checked out that morning, but at Hartford Children's Hospital, standing in the lobby of the rehabilitation wing, talking quietly with a nurse about scheduling for the new equipment. He looked older than Marcus remembered, or maybe Marcus was simply seeing him clearly for the first time in months. Daniel caught sight of his son across the lobby and went very still. "Dad," Marcus crossed the room, and up close, he could see that his father's eyes were tired in a way that went deeper than 4 bad nights in a motel. "I saw the article. I figured you would, eventually." Daniel's voice was careful, guarded in a way it had never been with Marcus before, and that guardedness hurt worse than anything his son could have said. "I wasn't trying to hide it from you forever. I didn't want it to be the reason you let me back in, if that makes sense." "It doesn't need to be the reason." Marcus's voice broke on the words. "Dad, I am so sorry. I let Rebecca's stress about money turn into taking it out on you, and I told myself it was about boundaries, about our house, but it wasn't. It was cowardice. I didn't want to have a hard conversation about budgeting, so I let you be the scapegoat instead. And then I stood there and watched you walk to your car in your slippers on Christmas morning, and I told myself that was fine. That was okay to do to my own father." Daniel didn't say anything for a long moment. Around them, the hospital hummed with its ordinary noise, an intercom page, a child laughing somewhere down the hall, the soft whir of a mobility chair passing by, quieter and smoother than it would have been 6 months ago, because of a valve mechanism a grieving man had built alone in his garage at midnight. "I gave it all away, Marcus," Daniel said finally. "Every dollar. I'm not telling you that to punish you. I'm telling you because I need you to understand I'm not going to walk back into your life holding money over anyone's head, and I'm never going to be the wealthy father who buys his way back to the table. If you want me back, it has to be because you want me, not what I could have given you." "I want you," Marcus said, and his voice cracked wide open. "Dad, I have always wanted you. I just forgot how to show it, and I let money and stress and Rebecca's fear turn into something ugly, and I am asking you not because of what's in the news, but because you're my father and I love you and I was wrong. Please come home." Daniel looked at his son for a long time, searching his face the way he used to when Marcus was small, and Daniel was trying to figure out if a scraped knee needed stitches or just a hug. Whatever he found there, it must have been enough, because something in his shoulders finally loosened, some tension he'd been carrying since the porch on Christmas morning. "I'm not moving back in," Daniel said. "Not right away. I think we both need some time to figure out what this looks like, a relationship instead of an arrangement, but I'll come to dinner Sunday." A small, tired smile. "Rebecca's dinner, if she still wants me." "She does," Marcus said immediately. "Dad, she does, we both do." Daniel nodded slowly, and for the first time since Christmas morning, something like peace settled over his face. He glanced back down the hallway, toward the wing where a boy in a new wheelchair was learning to turn smoothly for the first time in his life, in a machine built from a widower's grief and patience and a wife's memory. Then he looked back at his son. "Bring the kids Sunday," Daniel said. "I want to hear about their Christmas. I missed most of it." "I'll bring the cinnamon rolls too," Marcus said, voice thick. "You left them on the counter. I couldn't eat them. They're still in the fridge." "Then we'll have them Sunday," Daniel said, "together this time." They stood there a moment longer in the hospital lobby, two men who had almost lost something neither of them could have named until it was nearly gone. And then, slowly, Daniel opened his arms, and his son stepped into them the way he hadn't since he was a boy small enough to be lifted clean off the ground.